Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now let's begin. My name is Callan Merrick, and I've been working as a paramedic here in Seattle for about 9 years now. My partner Avery and I work the day shift, mostly dealing with the usual stuff: heart attacks, overdoses, car accidents, domestic calls. You name it, we've probably seen it. But there's one call from last summer that I still think about almost every day. It was a psychiatric emergency that should have been routine. But what happened that afternoon has completely changed how I look at this job. It was a Tuesday in July, around 2:30 p.m. Avery and I had just finished lunch when dispatch came over the radio. Unit 15, we have a priority 2 call. Female, 34 years old, psychiatric emergency. Patient is reportedly having a manic episode and threatening self-harm. Address is 4821 Pine Street, apartment 7B. Pine Street was in Capitol Hill, an area we knew well. Lots of young professionals, some artists. Generally a pretty safe neighborhood during the day. Psychiatric calls were nothing new for us. We probably handled 2 or 3 a week. Another psych call, Avery muttered as I started the engine. 3rd one this week. The drive took about 8 minutes. It was a converted Victorian house that had been split into apartments, painted yellow with white trim. There was already a police cruiser parked outside, which was standard procedure for psychiatric emergencies. Officer Mason Trask met us at the front door. I'd worked with him before on several calls. Solid guy, very professional. "What do we have?" I asked as we grabbed our equipment. "Her name is Alara Quinn, 34 years old. The landlord called it in after other tenants complained about screaming and banging coming from her apartment. She's been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, apparently off her medication for about 2 weeks." "Is she cooperative?" Avery asked. "Not exactly. She's locked herself in the bathroom and keeps yelling about people watching her through the windows. Classic paranoid behavior." We climbed to the 2nd floor and could hear a woman's voice coming from apartment 7B. The door was propped open, and we could see into a small living room that was completely trashed. Furniture was overturned, books and papers scattered everywhere, and there were what looked like thick blankets or towels covering all the windows. "Ilara," Officer Mason Trask called out, "the paramedics are here to help you." "I don't need help," came a voice from behind what I assumed was the bathroom door. "I need everyone to leave me alone. They're watching me." Avery rolled her eyes. "Here we go," she whispered to me. "Alara, my name is Callan. I'm a paramedic. We just want to make sure you're okay. Can you come out and talk to us?" "No, they'll see me if I come out. The windows." I looked around the apartment. Every single window was covered with thick blankets that had been duct taped to the walls. The place was dimly lit and felt stuffy from the lack of air circulation. "She's been like this for about 3 hours, Mason Trask explained quietly. "Neighbors say it started around 11 a.m. Avery knocked gently on the bathroom door. "Alara, we're not here to hurt you. We just want to talk." "Callan," Avery said quietly, pulling me aside. "We need to get her transported quickly. I've got 3 more calls holding, and this could take hours if we let her keep rambling about surveillance." "Let's just hear her out first," I said. "Maybe we can convince her to come voluntarily." "She's clearly manic and paranoid. The faster we get her sedated and to the hospital, the better for everyone." After a few minutes of coaxing, we finally heard the bathroom door unlock. Alara Quinn emerged slowly, and I could immediately see she was in the middle of a severe manic episode. Her hair was disheveled, her eyes were wide and darting around the room constantly, and she was wearing pajamas that looked like she'd been sleeping in them for days. "Are you alone?" she asked, looking directly at me. "Are you sure no one followed you here?" "It's just us, Alara. The police officer, my partner Avery, and me. We're here to help." She nodded, but kept glancing nervously at the covered windows. Her hands were shaking, and I could see she was sweating despite the apartment being relatively cool. "Alara, when was the last time you took your medication?" Avery asked, already pulling out her clipboard to start the transport paperwork. 2 weeks ago, maybe 3. I stopped because they were using it to track me." "Who was tracking you?" "The people in the building across the street. They have cameras pointed at my windows. They watch me all day and all night." Avery gave me a look that said, "See what I mean?" and continued writing. I looked over at the windows facing the street. There was indeed an apartment building across Pine Street, probably about 50 feet away. It was entirely possible that someone could see into Alara's apartment from there, but that was just normal city living. "Alara, we'd like to take you to the hospital so a doctor can evaluate you and maybe adjust your medication. Would that be okay?" She shook her head vigorously. "No hospitals. They're part of it too. They'll tell the watchers where I am." "Callan, we need to move," Avery said impatiently. "She's clearly not going to cooperate voluntarily." "Just give me a few more minutes," I told her. "Can you tell me more about these people who are watching you?" I asked Alara, trying to keep her talking. "They started about a month ago. First, it was just one person, a man with binoculars. Then more of them came. They take shifts. There's always someone watching." She led me over to one of the covered windows and carefully peeled back a corner of the blanket. "See that window on the 3rd floor? The one with the white curtains? That's where they usually position themselves during the day." I looked across the street at the building she was pointing to. It was just a normal apartment building, and I could see several windows with various types of curtains and blinds. The window she was indicating looked perfectly ordinary to me. "Alara, I don't see anyone in that window right now. They're good at hiding when other people are around, but they're there. They're always there." Avery had finished her assessment and gestured for me to step away from the window. "Callan, we're wasting time," she said firmly. "Her vitals are slightly elevated but stable. We need to transport her now, with or without her consent." As we were talking, Alara suddenly grabbed my arm. "Wait," she said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Do you see that?" She was pointing at the window again. I looked where she was indicating, and for just a moment, I thought I saw a flash of light, like sunlight reflecting off glass or a lens. "What did you see?" I asked. "Binoculars. He was using binoculars." I stared at the window more carefully. The angle of the afternoon sun was creating a lot of glare on the windows across the street, making it hard to see clearly. It was entirely possible that what I'd seen was just a reflection. But then I saw it again, a definite glint of light, and this time I could make out what looked like the silhouette of someone standing back from the window. "Avery," I called quietly, "come look at this." "Callan, I'm not playing into her delusions," Avery said without looking up from her paperwork. "We need to transport her now. Just look for a second." Avery sighed and joined me at the window reluctantly. I pointed toward the 3rd floor apartment. "Do you see anything unusual in that window?" Avery squinted across the street for maybe 2 seconds. "I see windows with sun glare. Can we please focus on our patient?" Just as she turned away, the silhouette in the window moved slightly, and the glint of light disappeared. There was definitely someone there, I told her, and they had something in their hands. Alara was nodding frantically. "See? I told you, they're always watching." "Callan," Avery said, pulling me aside, "you're starting to sound like her. This is exactly what paranoid patients do. They pull you into their delusions. We need to stay objective." "But I saw something." "You saw sunlight reflecting off a window. That's it." I wasn't so sure, but Avery was already calling Officer Mason Trask over. "Officer, we need to transport her involuntarily. She's refusing treatment and showing signs of being a danger to herself." "Wait," I said. "Let me try something first." I went back to Ilara. You said this started about a month ago. What made you first notice that someone was watching you? I was having trouble sleeping, so I got up around 3 a.m. to get some water. When I walked past the living room window, I saw a red light pointing at my apartment, like a laser pointer, but it was coming from that building. A laser pointer? Yeah, it was moving around on my walls and ceiling. When I looked out the window, I could see someone with a flashlight or something in that same third-floor window. Avery was getting visibly frustrated. Callan, you're encouraging her paranoid thinking. This is Psychology 101. Don't validate delusions. Did you call the police about the laser pointer? I asked Ilara, ignoring Avery. I tried, but they said unless someone was actually threatening me, there wasn't much they could do about someone looking out their own window. That actually sounded reasonable to me. Proving that someone was deliberately watching a neighbor would be difficult unless you caught them in the act. That's enough, Avery said firmly. Officer Mason Trask, we need to initiate an involuntary transport. The patient is clearly delusional, and my partner is getting too involved. Avery, just give me 5 more minutes, I said. No, Callan. This is exactly how paramedics get in trouble, by abandoning their training to play detective. Before Mason Trask could respond, his radio crackled to life with an unrelated call. While he stepped outside to respond, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Ilara had gone completely silent and was staring at the covered window with a look of pure terror on her face. "He's back," she whispered. "He's back, and he's angry." I looked at the window, and this time I could clearly see a silhouette moving behind the glass across the street. The person seemed to be gesticulating, like they were arguing with someone or agitated about something. "Avery, look at this. There's definitely someone there now." Avery glanced over briefly. "I see an apartment building. That's it." But as I watched, the silhouette suddenly disappeared from the window, and I saw what looked like a flashlight beam sweep across the building's exterior wall. "Ilara, has this person ever used lights to signal you before?" "All the time, especially at night. He flashes lights at my windows to let me know he's watching." Now I was really starting to feel uncomfortable. Even if Ilara was having a manic episode, some of what she was describing was starting to seem plausible. "Officer Mason Trask," I called when he came back inside. "Could you have someone check out the building across the street? Apartment 3B specifically?" Avery stepped between us. "Absolutely not. We're not going to waste police resources on a psychiatric patient's paranoid delusions." "What if she's not delusional about this part?" I asked. "Then you've been a paramedic for 9 years, and you should know better than to get emotionally involved with patients." Mason Trask looked between Avery and me, clearly unsure how to proceed. "I'll tell you what," he said finally. "Let me call for another unit to do a quick welfare check on that apartment. If there's nothing there, we proceed with the involuntary transport. If there is something suspicious, we'll take it from there." Avery was clearly annoyed, but she nodded. "Fine, but when they find nothing, we're leaving immediately." While we waited, Ilara seemed to calm down slightly, but she kept glancing nervously at the window. "Ilara," I said, "if someone really has been watching you, that would be incredibly stressful, even if you're also having symptoms from being off your medication." "That's what I keep trying to tell everyone. I know what my symptoms feel like, and this is different. This is real." About 15 minutes later, Mason Trask's radio crackled to life. "Unit 23 to Unit 12, we've made contact with the tenant in apartment 3B, male, approximately 45 years old, very nervous when we knocked. Claims he was just looking out his window. No evidence of surveillance equipment visible, but he refused to let us inside without a warrant." Mason Trask responded, "Any other observations?" "Yeah, actually. The apartment appears to have multiple telescopes or binoculars set up near the windows. And when we were talking to him, he kept looking across the street toward your location." I felt vindicated, but Avery just shook her head. "That doesn't prove anything. Lots of people have telescopes. This is still a psychiatric emergency. But something was bothering me about the whole situation. If Alara was right about being watched, then her paranoid thoughts weren't actually paranoid at all. They were accurate assessments of a real threat. Mason Trask, can your guys stay there for a few more minutes? I want to try something. I turned to Alara. If this person really has been watching you, he's probably watching right now. What if we gave him something to react to? What do you mean? What if I opened one of these blankets just for a few seconds and we see if anything happens across the street? Avery grabbed my arm. Callan, you're crossing a line here. We're medical professionals, not investigators. I'm just trying to understand what's happening to our patient. Before Avery could stop me, I pulled back one of the blankets from the main window facing the street. Alara immediately ducked down, but I stayed visible and waved toward the building across the street. Within seconds, Mason Trask's radio came to life. Unit 23 to Unit 12. The suspect just grabbed what appears to be binoculars and pointed them directly at your location. He's definitely watching that apartment. My blood ran cold. Alara wasn't paranoid at all. She was being stalked. But then something even stranger happened. Avery, who had been adamantly dismissing Alara's claims, suddenly seemed to change her entire demeanor. That's actually pretty disturbing, she said quietly. Someone really is watching her. I told you, Alara said, but she didn't sound vindicated. She sounded terrified. And now he knows you guys are here. He's going to be angry. I was about to ask what she meant when the lights in the apartment suddenly went out. We were plunged into darkness, with only the dim light filtering through the covered windows. Mason Trask immediately drew his flashlight, and Avery and I did the same. What just happened? Avery asked. He can control my electricity, Alara whispered. He's done it before. That's impossible, I said, but even as I said it, I wasn't entirely sure. Mason Trask was already on his radio calling for backup and requesting that someone check the building's electrical system. But before anyone could respond, we heard a loud banging sound coming from somewhere inside the apartment building. He's coming, Alara said, her voice barely audible. He's never come over here before, but he's coming. The banging sound was getting closer, like someone was running up the stairs. Everyone stay calm, Mason Trask said, positioning himself near the door. Avery, get the patient ready for immediate transport. But as Avery and I were helping Alara toward the door, the banging suddenly stopped. Then we heard a voice calling from the hallway. Alara? Alara, are you okay? This is your neighbor from across the street. I saw the lights go out and wanted to make sure you were safe. The voice sounded friendly, concerned even, but Alara's reaction was immediate and visceral. She started shaking uncontrollably and grabbed onto my arm so tightly it hurt. Don't let him in, she whispered. Please don't let him in. Mason Trask called through the door. Sir, this is the police. We're conducting a welfare check. Please identify yourself. Oh, thank goodness the police are here. I'm Ronan Bellamy from apartment 3B across the street. I've been concerned about Alara for weeks. I think she's been having some kind of mental health crisis. Avery and I exchanged glances. The man sounded completely reasonable, like a concerned neighbor, but Alara's terror seemed genuine, and we had just confirmed that someone from that apartment had been watching her with binoculars. Mr. Miller, we're going to need to speak with you separately. Please wait downstairs while we finish our assessment. Of course, of course. I just want to make sure she's getting the help she needs. We heard footsteps retreating down the hallway. Alara, I said quietly, that man seemed concerned about you. Are you sure he's the one who's been watching you? He's good at pretending to be normal, she said. But you didn't see what I saw in his apartment when the police were there. What do you mean? When they knocked on his door, I was watching from my peephole. His apartment, it's not normal. There are photos on the walls. Photos of me. Avery and I looked at each other. That detail was specific and disturbing enough to be believable. "Did you tell the police about the photos?" Avery asked. "I tried, but they said I was just paranoid." Mason Trask came back over to us. "The power outage appears to be isolated to just this apartment. Someone may have flipped the breaker switch in the basement." That was when I realized how serious this situation might actually be. If Ronan Bellamy had access to the building's electrical system, he could have been harassing Alara in ways that would be very difficult to prove. "Officer, I think we need to take a much closer look at this Ronan Bellamy." "Why?" I explained what Alara had told us about seeing photos of herself in his apartment. Mason Trask's expression became much more serious. "If that's true, we're dealing with a stalking situation, not just a psychiatric emergency." "But we still need to get Alara to the hospital," Avery said. "Even if someone is stalking her, she's clearly having a mental health crisis as well." She was right. Alara's symptoms were real, regardless of what was causing them. "Alara, we're going to take you to the hospital, but we're also going to make sure the police investigate Ronan Bellamy thoroughly. You're going to be safe." As we prepared to transport Alara, Mason Trask got another radio call. "Unit 12, we've obtained a warrant for apartment 3B. We're going in now." We waited anxiously as Mason Trask coordinated with the other officers. Alara seemed to be getting more agitated as we got closer to leaving the apartment. "He's going to follow us," she said. "He always knows where I go." That comment made me think of something. "Alara, how does this man seem to know so much about your schedule and activities?" "I don't know. It's like he can hear everything I do." Avery was checking Alara's vital signs one more time when Mason Trask's radio exploded with activity. "Unit 12, you need to see this. The apartment is set up like a surveillance center. Multiple telescopes, recording equipment, and there are hundreds of photos of the target and other women in the neighborhood." My stomach dropped. Alara hadn't been paranoid at all. She'd been the victim of an elaborate stalking operation. But then the radio crackled again with something that made my blood run cold. "We've also found what appears to be listening devices and possibly some kind of transmitting equipment. It looks like he may have been monitoring audio from her apartment as well." Alara looked at me with terror in her eyes. "That's how he always knows what I'm doing. He can hear everything." I realized that if Ronan Bellamy had been listening to everything happening in Alara's apartment, he had heard our entire conversation. He knew that we were taking her to the hospital. He knew that the police were investigating him, and he knew exactly what we were planning to do. "We need to leave now," I told Avery. "If he's been listening, he knows everything." As we started to move Alara toward the door, Mason Trask's radio came to life one more time. "All units, be advised. The suspect, Ronan Bellamy, is no longer in his apartment. We don't know where he went." That was when I heard footsteps in the hallway again, but this time they were moving much faster and more purposefully. "He's coming back," Alara whispered. The footsteps stopped right outside the apartment door. Then we heard Ronan Bellamy's voice again, but this time it sounded completely different, angry and threatening. "Alara, I know you're in there with those people. You've ruined everything. Do you have any idea what you've done?" Mason Trask immediately radioed for backup and positioned himself defensively near the door. "Mr. Miller, this is the police. You need to leave this building immediately." "I'm not going anywhere until I talk to Alara. She's been telling lies about me, and I want to set the record straight." The door handle started to rattle, like someone was trying to force it open. "Avery, get Alara out of here," I said. "Is there a back exit?" "There's a fire escape through the bedroom window," Alara said. We quickly moved toward the back of the apartment while Mason Trask called for more units. But as we reached the bedroom, we could hear the front door being forced open. "Alara?" Ronan Bellamy's voice echoed through the apartment. "I just want to talk to you." Avery and I helped Alara through the bedroom window onto the fire escape. As we climbed down, I could hear Mason Trask shouting commands and calling for backup. We made it to the alley behind the building just as additional police units arrived out front. Avery and I loaded Alara into our ambulance and immediately headed for the hospital. During the transport, Alara was much calmer, but she kept looking out the back window of the ambulance. "Is he following us?" she asked. "No," I assured her. "The police have him contained." "You believe me now, don't you?" she said. "About all of it?" I nodded. "I'm sorry it took so long for someone to take you seriously." "The worst part wasn't even being watched," Alara said quietly. "It was having everyone think I was crazy when I knew something real was happening to me." When we arrived at Harborview Medical Center, Dr. Idris Holloway, the attending psychiatrist, met us at the door. I gave him a detailed report about everything that had happened, including the discovery of the surveillance equipment and Ronan Bellamy's aggressive behavior. "This is actually more common than people realize," Dr. Idris Holloway said. "Stalking victims often develop anxiety and paranoid symptoms as a result of being watched and harassed. If she was already vulnerable due to being off her medication, the stress could have triggered a manic episode. So she was having psychiatric symptoms, but they were caused by a real threat." "Exactly. We'll get her back on her medication and provide counseling for the trauma she's experienced. But the most important thing is that the actual threat has been removed." Avery and I were finishing our paperwork when Officer Mason Trask came to the hospital to update us. "Ronan Bellamy is in custody," he said. When we searched his apartment, we found evidence that he'd been stalking at least 6 different women in the neighborhood. He had detailed schedules of their activities, hundreds of photos taken with telephoto lenses, and audio recordings from listening devices he'd planted in their apartments. "How long had this been going on?" "Based on the evidence, probably about 2 years. Alara was his primary target, but there were others." "What about the listening devices in her apartment?" "We found 3 of them, one in the living room, one in the bedroom, and one in the kitchen. They were disguised as electrical outlet covers." That explained how Ronan Bellamy always seemed to know what Alara was doing and where she was going. "The really disturbing part," Mason Trask continued, "is that he had been calling in false reports about Alara to various agencies, trying to get her committed to a psychiatric facility. I felt sick to my stomach. He was trying to get her institutionalized. Apparently his plan was to discredit her so that if she ever reported the stalking, no one would believe her because she'd already been labeled as mentally ill. That was when I realized how close we had come to playing right into Ronan Bellamy's plan. If I hadn't insisted on investigating Alara's claims, we would have transported her involuntarily to a psychiatric facility, and her stalker would have continued his harassment with no consequences. "Avery," I said, "we need to talk about how we handled this case." Avery had been unusually quiet since the arrest. "I know what you're going to say, and you're right. I almost made a terrible mistake." We both did. We were so focused on her psychiatric symptoms that we almost missed the fact that she was a crime victim. I kept thinking about our training. Don't validate delusions, stay objective, get psychiatric patients transported quickly. But I forgot that people with mental illness can also be victims of real crimes. Over the next few days, I found myself thinking constantly about Alara's case and how differently it could have ended. If we had dismissed her claims entirely, if we had sedated her and transported her involuntarily, if we had never investigated her reports of being watched, Ronan Bellamy might have continued stalking her and his other victims indefinitely. I followed up with Dr. Idris Holloway a week later to see how Alara was doing. "She's responding well to her medication," he told me. "But more importantly, she's no longer experiencing paranoid thoughts. Now that the real threat has been eliminated, her symptoms have improved dramatically." So the stalking really was causing her psychiatric symptoms. It was definitely a major contributing factor. She was in a vulnerable state due to being off her medication, and the chronic stress of being watched and harassed pushed her into a full manic episode. Dr. Idris Holloway paused and looked at me seriously. You know, if you hadn't taken her seriously about the surveillance, we might never have discovered what was really happening. Most people in her situation aren't that lucky. That conversation changed how I approach every psychiatric call now. I realized that my job isn't just to treat medical emergencies. It's also to be an advocate for people who might not be able to advocate for themselves. And sometimes the people who seem the most paranoid are actually the ones who need our protection the most. This case taught me that reality isn't always what it appears to be. Ilara Quinn was failed by a system that automatically assumed her fears were symptoms of mental illness, when in fact she was a victim who desperately needed help. I think about that afternoon whenever I respond to psychiatric calls now, and I make sure to really listen to what patients are telling me, even when it sounds unlikely, because sometimes the most unbelievable stories turn out to be completely true.